Hello, AP Lit. I did my book review on Their Eyes Were Watching God by Zora Neale Hurston. Miss Hurston was born in Alabama, and then when she was 3 years old, she moved to Eatonville, Florida, which was actually the setting of a lot of her short stories and novels. And, and then she moved to New York after college for a little while and wrote some of her short stories there. But then after that, she missed Eatonville so much, she just moved back. Um, the style of writing is very different from the rest of it because even though it has a sophisticated tone and it's of literary merit, she still injects her own style into it, and she grew up in segregation and her grandma was a slave, and she um she was a very different writer because she was a young black woman and because she wanted all her stories to be about the black struggles of this time period. And it was in 1937 during the Great Depression, so there were a lot of bad stuff going on right there. The plot. So the setting is Eatonville, Florida, and you don't get introduced to the main character at first. It opens at the end of the story. So it's Janie Crawford coming back after a long absence, and all the townspeople are gossiping because she had run away with a younger guy and she came back alone. So everyone's like, oh my gosh, he ran off and went with a younger woman. And then this girl named Phoebe stands up for her and she's like, no, I'm gonna go talk to her, see what actually happened. So she goes and talks to Janie, and Janie starts from the very beginning and talks about her childhood. And Miss Hurston injects into her own life. So she talks about her grandma, and Janie's grandma, Nanny, was raped by a slave owner, which gave Janie this beautiful, long, straight hair that everyone's jealous of all the time. And so Nanny wants the best for Janie, obviously, and when she's 16, she starts getting these sexual tendencies. And then when Nanny finds out, she marries her off to an older rich man named Logan. And at first, Janie's hesitant and she's like, no, I don't really want to do that. But then she's like, no, I'll start to love him once we get married. And a couple years go by and she's married and she's really unhappy. And then she meets this guy named Joe Stark, and they start flirting, and she develops a nickname for him, Jody. And eventually she gets in this big fight with Logan, and she leaves him and runs off with Jody. And then she's married to Jody for a really long time, and throughout their marriage, Jody is really like cramping her style, and like he didn't like that everybody stared at her and her long beautiful hair, so he made her wear it in a hair rag. And they bought a store together, and that was like the gathering place of the whole town. And out front of the store, everyone would play checkers, and he wouldn't let Janie play checkers, so that was a really big deal for her. Then over the years, Jody just knocks her down and is like, you're just a woman, and oh, but you're too high up to do all this fun stuff that Janie wants to do. Like, she wants to go to town events, but Jody says, no, like, you're too good for that. And then eventually the years go by, and then Jody's getting old now, and he's getting ugly, and Janie starts to notice it, and I think Jody starts to notice it too, and then he's basically just like beats on her and is like, you're getting old, but she still looks pretty fine, for how old she is. And so Jody's just antagonizing her and picking on her, and in front of everyone, he finally does it, and Janie snaps back, and she's like, no, you're old and ugly. And then to assert his dominance, Jody takes her out into the middle of the road and then beats her. So after that, Jody and Janie don't sleep in the same room together. They live on separate sides of their house, and they don't talk to each other for a long time. And then Jody gets super sick, so Jody is doing everything to like make himself be better, all these miracle cures and everything, until finally Janie sends like a real doctor up there, and the real doctor tells Janie, but not Jody, that he has kidney failure. So then Janie's walks into Jody's room for the first time they've talked in a long time, and she's like, "Look, you're dying," and he's like, "Don't talk to me like that, and don't tell me these things," and then she finally just lets him have it. After all of these years of marriage, she just goes off and just lets him have it, and yeah. And then while she's yelling at him, he's like, "Stop, why are you doing this to me?" And then he finally gets so worked up that he just dies while they're talking. And at first, Janie is like, "Oh my gosh, like he's finally dead. I have independence and I'm just so happy." But she has to hide it so the townspeople don't hate on her. And for 9 months, she's alone until this tall, dark, handsome man comes into the shop where she and Jody owned, and teaches her how to play checkers like she always wanted to learn. And his name is Tea Cake. And eventually, Tea Cake and Janie like run away together and get married. And then they move to the Muck, or like the Everglades, but everyone calls it the Muck. And they live a happy life. You know, they have a couple ups and downs, but they're good. And after 2 years of living in the Everglades and being married, a huge hurricane hits and floods all of their homes, and Jenny and Tea Cake run away, and they have to swim for miles and miles because it's so flooded and everything. And this rabid dog attacks Janie in the water, but Tea Cake wrestles it back and is like, "No, dude, I'll save you." And the dog bites his cheek, but before he kills it. And then eventually Tea Cake dies. I won't tell you how because that's the best part. Tea Cake dies, and then Janie goes back to Eagleton, where she and Jody lived for so long, and that brings us back, or not Eagleton, Eatonville. Goes back to Eatonville, and that's where her and Jody lived for so long. And it brings us back to the beginning of story where she's talking to Phoebe, and then finally she's like, "And that's where we are." And then she goes home that night and she listens and she talks about it, and she's just like, "You know, no matter the trials and tribulations that I've lived through, I have lived my best life that I could possibly live." Some archetypes. Janie is obviously the protagonist, and she's basically like pushing through everything, and she tries her hardest to do the best she can to please everyone, but she obviously can't do that. Then the antagonist is Jody, because he's basically like raining on her parade and, you know, not letting her be her. Some themes are the power of speech and silence, and she was kind of, my take on it was, she was silent for her whole marriage with Jody, and she suffered a whole lot, and she lived like the worst she possibly could live throughout the marriage. And then finally, when she yells at him and is like, "No, dude," she gains her independence, and she's finally okay again. A couple of symbols. Janie's hair is her identity. Her long straight hair never let her fit in with the black people, because her hair meant she was half white, and so she never would know like real struggle or anything like that. And then the hurricane is, everything can change in the blink of an eye. Like, she was living an amazing life, and then the hurricane hit and she lost everything. One really, really important quote that I loved a lot is this one. "It was inevitable that she should accept any inconsistency and cruelty from her deity, as all good worshippers do from theirs. All gods who receive homages are cruel. All gods dispense suffering with no reason, otherwise they would not be worshipped. Through indiscriminate suffering men know fear, and fear is the most divine emotion. It is the stones for altars and the beginning of wisdom. Half gods are worshipped in wine and flowers. Real gods require blood. And I thought that was really important because it shows that Janie had to suffer through everything. Her entire life she was suffering. And she said at the end of the book how fulfilling her life was. And even though she went through all of that trouble, she was still really, really happy with everything that she had gone through. And then she has a neighbor in the Everglades, Mrs. Turner, who plays the perfect, churchgoer, and she wants to be like the perfect citizen, and she goes to church every Sunday, and she's really just a bad person, and she talks about everyone, and she's just not good. And I thought that really spoke about religion today. Like, everyone tries so hard to be the perfect person and thinks that they're better than everyone else, but they're not. They're just rude. And I think an AP student, how they could use it on question 3 prompt would be, this is a coming of age novel, even though it's not like puberty, like coming into growing up, but she is really coming into her own after Jody dies, and when she yells at him, and she's really just becoming her own person, and then she finally runs off with Tea Cake and lives her best life. So I think it's really a coming of age novel, and it tells how once you speak up and speak your truth, then anything can happen, and the best could possibly happen. And yeah, thank you.